Right, one of the questions that came up in the webinar last week was when to find a blast load on a building. According to ASCE guide for blast design for petrochemical facilities, the wall facing the blast is designed for a reflected load. The loads on other sides are also predicted from the design guide equations. Do we have to emphasize what different walls need to be designed for different loads, or will it be understood by the design firm if we specify that the design needs to follow the ASCE document? All right, good question. The response to that, it's BakerRisk's position that the specification for a building should clarify the blast load at each surface of the building, remove any ambiguity, generally leaving it up to the building design firm or contractor to calculate or assume the blast loads at different building surfaces increases the likelihood of mistakes being made. By following the BakerRisk recommendation, the owner removes the uncertainty of which may surface when leaving it up to chance. All right, our next question that came up was calling back to an example that was brought up in the webinar regarding the calculation of a 3 psi free fill blast load and a 6.5 psi reflected blast load. So here's the question. In your reflected blast load example, should the facing side of the building be designed for 6.5 psi overpressure and the remaining sides designed for 3 psi, or are all the elevations designed for 6.5 psi? Okay, the response to that. The wall facing the explosion should always be designed for the reflected overpressure. The decision for the owner is, are the other building surfaces also designed for that higher overpressure? When making this decision, reasons to design all surfaces for the reflected overpressure may include adding conservatism into your design, accounting for future plant expansions, and keeping the wall design consistent for ease of construction. On the other hand, reason to design the wall surfaces for the calculated blast load at each surface, accounting for the reflected and side-on pressure, would include developing a more economical design and providing some construction cost savings. When making these choices, realize there are typically more than one explosion design scenario that could impact a building. Explosion scenario A may be on the west side of the building, and explosion scenario B may be on the east side of the building. In a hypothetical scenario, both the east and the west wall would be reflected, but would be reflected from different explosion scenarios. All right, the third question received was, is there recommended guidance on permanent attachment to the foundation versus letting a building move during a blast event? And this question seems to be in regards to temporary or portable modular type buildings that are set on the ground or a foundation. So our response to that one, BakerRisk recommends anchoring modular buildings to a foundation to prevent or mitigate the building from sliding in a blast event. We have recently completed numerous test programs through the Explosion Research Cooperative documenting the displacement of single-wide modular units in response to blast loads. The results of these test programs demonstrate the magnitude of displacement possible and the amount of debris that can be generated within the building as non-structural items like TVs and bookshelves are toppled. Also, it's worth noting, in the most recent version of API RP 753, there are considerations for acceleration, displacement, and tipping effects on modular buildings. If the modular buildings are not anchored, the impact of blast-induced displacement on interior non-structural items and the occupant vulnerability should be accounted for. All right, and the last question that came up from the webinar, what recommendation would you offer on a temporary basis while waiting for a new permanent building to be completed? The response to that, when looking to protect occupants until a permanent solution can be put in place, like a new building, there are typically 3 options to consider. The first option is relocate personnel that were in the building to other buildings on site. The second is implement upgrades to address deficiencies in the existing building to mitigate risk. And third, house the people or the occupants in hazard-resistant modular buildings. One note on the modular buildings or temporary buildings. When placing a temporary building on site, the owner should first review API RP 753 related to the management of hazards with the location of portable buildings. The guiding principles are the same with temporary buildings as they are for permanent buildings. One, locate personnel away from the process area, and once a building location is determined, design that building to protect the occupants from explosion, fire, and toxic hazard. One additional consideration when citing portable or temporary buildings, API RP 753 does place additional restriction on the placement of non-essential occupants. For more information on this, you can watch a previous BakerRisk webinar when we covered API RP 72, 73, and 756. That wraps up the questions. Thanks for your attendance and look forward to seeing you soon.